more from that book in the second half. These books are available during the interval for purchase. We move on now to Unicorn, the poetry of Angela Carter. Now I'm going to make my own purchase this evening. 108 pages, crammed with poetry. And I was just reading at the beginning here, so just so you know what you're getting, you don't want to tell too much about what you're getting, but just so you don't want to be overly surprised. It's with imagery at times startling in its violence and disconcerting in its presentation of sexuality, just so you know. Beautiful book, and there's an essay in here about Angela Carter. We actually had Angela Carter in our reading group in the library in Stoke Newington. I've got to say, for me, she's a tough cookie, this woman, Angela Carter, but a marvellous writer. So I'm going to introduce myself. This is probably the last introduction I'm going to do here, actually. So I'm going to introduce the author of the essay and the selector of these poems, Rosemary Hill, who's sitting here. I knew first Christopher Logue, who was Rosemary's husband, and we were friends. And Christopher Logue, if you don't know him, is a wonderful poet, and his poet continues to be republished in new forms, which is fantastic. And there was one, I'll tell you a little incident about, Christopher died a few years ago, and there's a memorial in the cemeteries. Which cemetery is it in, Rosemary?
Kensal Green.
It's a wonderful memorial to Christopher in Kensal Green Cemetery, and there was a laying of the stone celebration, and on that occasion I was a bit late, and I came with Christopher Reid, the other poet, and we were feeling very embarrassed because obviously we wanted to be there at the right time, but we didn't get there, and it was a very cold and wet day, and we saw the Rosemary and Gavin here, the little cluster around doing the thing, and the celebration of us is started, and you don't really want to be late for that. Christopher Reid also writes poems, and so we came along sheepishly. We were glad we'd found each other. That was something. At least there were two of us, and so we came along, and as we approached and Rosemary was making the speech, seeing us approaching, she said, "And talking of late poets." So, to read from this book, could you please welcome Rosemary Hill?
Thank you very much, John. This collection came about because I was asked to write a piece for the London Review of Books about Angela Carter, who is most known now, I suppose, for her reinvented fairy stories, The Bloody Chamber. But when I was asked to do this, Christopher hadn't been dead for very long, and I just could hear him saying, as he always said, the thing about Angela Carter was she was very underrated as a poet. So I thought, well, I'll include some of her poems in my piece. I'll see where they've been republished, because she's hugely popular now. Nowhere were they republished. So I thought I would look in Christopher's things. And he had his old school tuck box, where he kept his really important things, including, Christopher was born in 1926, he published his first book of poems in the 1940s. He sent a copy to Ezra Pound, who wrote back a letter which in its entirety reads, "Not bad." And Christopher kept this letter forever. Anyway, I looked in there, and there, along with the letter from Ezra Pound, was a clipped together, roneoed, for anyone old enough to know what that means, typed out poem, long poem by Angela Carter called Unicorn, and that's what gives the book its title. I'm not going to read Unicorn to you because it's a long poem and it involves singing, and you wouldn't like it if I sang it to you. What I'm going to read 4 poems, the first one of which is called Life-Affirming Poem About Small Pregnant White Cat. And the thing about Carter is that she started writing poems in the early 60s. She stopped in the 70s and went on to novels. But she did it, so she started at a time when to be a woman poet was always to be referred to as a woman poet. And women poets were supposed to write about cats, flowers, and being unhappy in love. And what she did with her cat poem was to do what she did with the fairy stories later on, really, to take a very familiar, cosy subject and make it just slightly creepy and uneasy. She sits, slumps, and she, bulging sack of life, becomes a melting snowcat, haphazardly thrown together by careless children, stuffed full, brimful, full to the teeth with kittens. She yowls, and you fear an incontinent brindled Kindle will burst wrong ways out of the pink front door. Inside the swollen sides of the small white cat, who suddenly, unexpectedly finds herself so heavy she thumps about, clattering, snugly buttoned under 2 pink ranks of nipples, such as ermine and double-breasted jacket she wears, as used by Shirley Temple. Such an ingenue as she, was she but now betrayed. Buttoned up inside her, inside, conceive, but taut stretched womb crammed. Some more than base Indian black hole, is it, in there? Is it like a slit capsicum, clutch of seed hugging the central column of an inexpressible convoluted interior? Is it like that? Regardless, miracle of everyday things, inside her all the little furry commas lie blindly, futurity and futurity, stirring, shifting, waiting to be born. Angela Carter was very much a writer of the 60s, and what we all know about the 60s is pop music and sex and the overthrowing of all the conventions. But she was very good at talking about how the 60s weren't like they said in the movies. She writes very well about how the 60s, with all the pop and all the new stuff, was also really a post-war period, and one of the most, in fact one of the very few, really kind of poignant poems she wrote is, I think, about her parents' generation, about that generation of people who got married as virgins, having never lived together, and found the whole business, however sincere they were, rather frightening. And this is Poem for a Wedding Photograph, 1966. Posing for the photographer, they stand together under a green tree, in bridal and unfamiliar clothes. Dressed up, they are strangers to one another. They move awkwardly, smile the shy, nervous smiles of shipwrecked voyagers, never met on the crowded liner till now in the open boat, embarking in embarrassment on a strange voyage together, over a strange sea. Improvise a sail from all her satin, make a mast out of his body, their hands clutch, suddenly, we have only each other. Who are we? Under the green tree, the bride, gift wrapped in white, her veil drifts in the wind, caressing his good black suit. The shutter clicks, they are taken. Frozen in this eternal moment forever, scissored out of the fabric of their time, an icon of marriage, like Arnold Feeney and his wife, in the cluttered room with the little dog to signify fidelity. In the garden, under a tree, the first man and wife of all and ever, in a silver frame, for life. Angela Carter's own marriage, first marriage, didn't go terribly well. And when, having begun to make a life as a writer, and to make a reputation as a writer, she won the Somerset Maugham Award. Those awards are still going for a writer under 25, and the only condition is that the writer must use the money to travel. And she said that Somerset Maugham, who was not himself at all keen on marriage, would be pleased to know that she had used the money to leave her husband. So she went to Japan, where everything changed for her. It was an extremely important experience. She loved Japan and its art and its beauty, but she also said she felt as a very tall, quite broad European woman, she always felt like an outsider. And she wrote this poem, the third of the four I'm going to read, called Hanabi, which was about going to a firework display. I think they must love fireworks so much because fireworks are auto-destructive, but do not make a mess. We lay down in the stubbled field to watch the firework display. Along the paths were stalls where they grilled corn and cuttlefish on charcoal or sold goldfish in plastic bags, balloons with rabbit ears and other gewgaws. Icy, icy, icy cream, sang a man whose box of wares smoked with cold. Quiet crowds came out to watch the fireworks, softly squeaking children with well-brushed hair, lovers who discreetly dispersed in the sedge along the river, while the darkness filled with palpable if bourgeois magic, and the fireworks hung dissolved earrings on the night. in this preposterous language, they call them hanabi, that is flower fire. And the last poem I'm going to read to you is very, very, very short, and it's one of the things that Angela Carter had in common with Christopher, which I think why he liked her work so much, was that she was very good at taking in a traditional form. Christopher wrote his most sustained work was a version, a reworking of the Iliad, and she did the same thing with fairy tales, and she also did, she took off on the work of Lewis Carroll. And this is a very, very short final poem called Through the Looking Glass. If you remember, at the end of Through the Looking Glass, Alice shakes her kitten, and she says, well, which of us dreamed it? She doesn't know whether she was the kitten's dream or kitten was hers. And at that point, the kitten is frightened, and the looking glass goes solid again, and the story is over. With Angela Carter, things were always slightly more complicated and messy. Through the looking glass. Waking, Alice shook the kitten, demanding, which dreamed it? And it peed with fright, and the nursery grew rank with metaphysics.